They say you can never truly go home again. For Morgan Freeman, the world's most recognizable voice, a routine trip to Charleston would prove this saying tragically true. He had everything: an Oscar on his mantle, the respect of Hollywood, and a voice that had narrated the dreams and hopes of millions. But on a warm southern evening, a chance encounter outside the Dock Street Theater would shake the foundations of his carefully constructed world. The Charleston Film Festival always held a special place in Morgan's heart. The historic streets, with their cobblestone charm, the Spanish moss hanging like nature's curtains, and the people, warm, genuine, their accents melodic in ways that reminded him of his Mississippi childhood. This year they were honoring his lifetime achievement with a retrospective of his work. "Mr. Freeman, just one more photo," called out a persistent reporter as Morgan made his way through the theater's side entrance. His security team kept the small crowd at bay as they moved toward the waiting car. The evening had been perfect: standing ovations, heartfelt tributes, and stories from directors who'd shaped his career. The night air was thick with humidity, carrying the scent of magnolias and distant sea salt. Morgan paused for a moment, lifting his face to feel the evening breeze. Charleston's nights always reminded him of evenings spent on his grandmother's porch, listening to stories that first taught him the power of words. "I think I'll walk for a bit," he told his driver, waving off the security team's concerned looks. "Just around the block, I need some air." "Sir, we really should," his head of security began. 10 minutes, Morgan insisted with that gentle firmness that had become his trademark. "I'll meet you at the hotel." Reluctantly, they agreed, watching as he strolled down Church Street, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the evening shadows. Morgan walked slowly, savoring the quiet. Fans occasionally recognized him, but the southern politeness of Charleston meant they nodded respectfully, rather than interrupting his solitude. He found himself wandering toward the waterfront, where the Cooper River reflected the city lights. Like scattered gold coins, that's when he saw him. The figure was hunched over, wearing a weathered jacket despite the warm evening. He was rummaging through a trash bin near the water's edge, his movements methodical, practiced. A man who had done this countless times before. Something about the way the man moved caught Morgan's attention. There was a rhythm to it, a certain grace that seemed at odds with the desperate act. It triggered something in his memory, a half-forgotten melody from decades past. The man must have sensed someone watching him, because he looked up suddenly. Their eyes met across the waterfront. Promenade and time seemed to fold in on itself. Those eyes. Morgan knew those eyes. Images flooded his mind. 2 young boys huddled over an old tape recorder, their excited voices capturing made-up stories and dreams of someday being heard, the soft click of the record button, laughter echoing through. "Mississippi Summer Nights." "Billy," Morgan whispered, his feet moving forward before his brain fully registered what was happening. "Billy Thornton?" The man's face went pale. He straightened up so quickly that he knocked over the bin, sending empty coffee cups and papers scattering across the pavement. Without a word, he turned and started walking away, his shoulders hunched as if trying to disappear into himself. "Wait!" Morgan called out, his distinctive voice carrying across the waterfront. "Billy, is that you?" The man walked faster, weaving through the evening crowd with the skill of someone who had learned to be invisible. Morgan followed, ignoring the surprised looks from passers-by who recognized him. More memories surfaced now, memories buried, under decades of fame and fortune. He remembered sitting on the banks of the Pearl River, both of them 11 years old, Billy recording Morgan's voice on a borrowed tape recorder. "Say it again," Billy had insisted, his eyes shining with certainty. "Say the part about the river knowing all secrets." "The river knows all secrets," young Morgan had repeated, trying to sound important. "Your voice, Morgan," Billy had said, rewinding the tape to play it back. "It's special, like it was made for telling stories. Someday everybody's going to want to hear it." Now, watching the homeless man disappear into the crowd, Morgan felt like he was watching those childhood dreams dissolve into the gathering darkness of the Charleston evening. "Sir?" His security detail had caught up to him, concerned by his sudden pursuit. "Everything okay?" Morgan stood there, torn between his scheduled responsibilities and the pull of the past. The crowd around him was growing, phones out, filming, the unusual sight of Hollywood royalty standing on a waterfront promenade, staring after a homeless person. "Find out everything you can about William Thornton," he told his assistant. "Grew up with me in Mississippi. We lost touch maybe 40 years ago." "Yes, sir," she replied, already typing on her tablet. "But you have the breakfast panel tomorrow morning." "Cancel it," Morgan said, his eyes still fixed on the spot where Billy had disappeared. "Cancel everything for the next few days." As his team scrambled to rearrange his schedule, Morgan couldn't shake the image of those familiar eyes, now haunted and afraid. What had happened to the boy who had first recognized something special in his voice? The friend who had once convinced him that his words could change the world? Back in his hotel suite, Morgan sat by the window looking out over the lights of Charleston. His phone buzzed constantly with messages about missed events and rescheduled appearances, but he barely noticed them. His mind was decades in the past, remembering another night when everything had seemed possible. They had been sitting on Billy's roof with that same tape recorder between them, the summer stars brilliant above the Mississippi countryside. Their voices had been different then, higher, filled with childhood certainty. "We're going to be famous one day, Morgan," Billy had said, pressing the record button. "Higher with your voice, me with my stories. We'll make people feel things they never felt before." "How?" Morgan had asked, always the more practical of the two. Billy had turned to him with that confident smile that always made Morgan believe anything was possible. "Because voices can change the world. The right words in the right voice at the right time, they can change everything." Now, looking out over the city, Morgan felt the weight of all the years between that night and this one. He had achieved the fame they'd dreamed of, his voice recognized worldwide, his narration bringing gravitas to everything from penguin migrations to the history of the universe. But what had happened to Billy? His assistant knocked on the door, entering with a tablet in hand. "Sir, I have some preliminary information about William Thornton." Morgan turned from the window. "Tell me." "It's not much, sir. He worked as a sound engineer for several studios in New York until about 15 years ago. Then he just disappears from all records. No tax filings, no fixed address, nothing." 15 years ago. Morgan frowned. "What happened then?" "We're still looking into it, sir. There seems to be some kind of gap in his employment record, right before he disappeared. Like it's been redacted." That didn't make sense. Why would anyone redact information about a homeless man? Morgan's phone buzzed with an unexpected text. From an unknown number. Some voices were never meant to be heard. "Leave it alone, Morgan." A chill ran through him despite the warm evening. He checked the number. No caller ID, no way to trace it. "Find him," Morgan told his assistant, his decision made. Whatever it takes. As his team began making calls and accessing databases, Morgan walked back to the window, staring out at the city where Billy was hiding somewhere in the shadows. He pulled out his phone and opened an old photo album he rarely viewed. There it was, a faded photograph of two grinning boys holding an old tape recorder, their whole futures ahead of them. One would go on to have the most recognized voice in the world. The other would end up digging through trash on the streets. Fair of Charleston. But why? The question haunted him as he stared at the old photograph. What could have happened to turn his brilliant friend into a homeless man who ran at the sight of him? And why did Billy look so afraid? Morgan had a feeling he wasn't going to like the answer, but he had to know. He owed Billy that much. After all, it had been Billy who first recognized the power in his voice. Billy who had believed in him when nobody else did. Billy who had given him the confidence to share his voice with the world. Now it was time to repay that debt. As the night deepened over Charleston, Morgan Freeman began to plan. He had narrated documentaries, brought fictional characters to life, and voiced the thoughts of penguins and presidents alike. Surely he could find one man in one city. But something told him this would be the most important search of his life. And he was right, though not for any of the reasons he could imagine on that warm Charleston night. The truth, when he finally discovered it, would shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew about his success, his voice, and the true power of storytelling. But that would come later. For now, he had a friend to find. Morning came with a flurry of phone calls. Morgan's agent was furious about the cancelled appearances, The festival director was concerned, and 3 different producers had urgent questions about upcoming projects. Morgan ignored them all, focusing instead on a map of Charleston spread across the hotel room desk. "Sir, I've marked all the homeless shelters in a 5-mile radius," his assistant Emily said, placing small red pins on the map. "There are 7 main locations where someone might seek regular help." Morgan studied the pattern. He wouldn't stay. At the larger shelters, too many people would recognize him, even after all these years. "Why is finding this man so important?" Emily asked gently. Morgan picked up the faded photo of 2 boys with their tape recorder. Because before there was Morgan Freeman, the actor. There was just Morgan and Billy, 2 kids who believed in the power of stories. As his security team prepared to visit the shelters, Morgan closed his eyes, letting memory pull him back to 1955. Greenwood, Mississippi was a different world then, segregated, tense, but somehow still capable of producing moments of childhood. Magic. Billy had lived 3 houses down, the son of the local radio station technician. While other boys played baseball, Morgan and Billy had spent hours recording stories, practicing voices, creating worlds with nothing but words. "You gotta feel it in your chest," 11-year-old Billy had instructed, thumping his own skinny ribcage. "The best voices come from deep down, like thunder before it hits." Morgan had practiced for weeks, dropping his voice lower, finding that resonance that would later become his trademark. "That's it," Billy had shouted the first time Morgan got it right. "That's the voice that's going to make you famous." The memory dissolved as Morgan's security chief knocked on the door. The cars, "Ready, sir." Charleston streets looked different in the harsh morning light. The first shelter was near the historic market, a converted church with stained glass windows. Inside, the director recognized Morgan immediately. "Mr. Freeman. What an unexpected honor." Morgan showed her the photo. "I'm looking for this man. His name is William Thornton, though he might go by Billy." Recognition flickered in her eyes. "The storyteller. That's what the residents call him. He stays here sometimes, but never for more than a night or 2. Morgan's heart quickened. "When was he last here?" 3 days ago. He told the most amazing story about sailors who could navigate by listening to the stars. She hesitated. "He always carries an old leather satchel. Won't let anyone touch it." "Did he mention where he was going?" She shook her head. "He never does, but he often uses the computers at the Charleston Library on Calhoun Street. Research, he says. The Charleston Library was a stately building with columns and wide steps. Inside, an elderly librarian with cat-eye glasses looked up as Morgan approached. "Ms. Hartwell," he read from her nameplate. "I'm looking for a friend who uses your computers regularly. His name is Billy Thornton." "I know who you mean," she said quietly. "Comes in every Tuesday and Thursday, always sits at computer 7, always researches the same topics." "Which are?" She pulled out a ledger. "Voice analysis, sound patterns, frequencies, old radio broadcasts, very specific requests, recordings from the 1970s mostly. He printed these articles last week." She showed Morgan a list: subsonic frequencies and neural pathways, voice pattern recognition in intelligence operations, auditory manipulation techniques. "Did he say why he was researching these topics?" "No, but he seemed frightened last time. Kept looking over his shoulder." She hesitated. "Mr. Freeman, he left something for you." Morgan looked up, surprised. "For me?" "He said a famous man might come asking about him." She reached under the desk and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1975. "Innovative sound engineer joins secret government project." A young Billy smiled from the photo. On the back, in shaky handwriting, "Some voices were never meant to be heard. Leave it alone, Morgan." The same warning from the text message. Morgan's driver was waiting outside. "Where to next, sir?" "Let's try the waterfront. That's where I saw him yesterday." As they drove, Morgan called Emily. "What have you found about Billy's career?" "He was highly respected in the industry, sir. Worked on films, then radio, then specialized in voice recording technology. In 1974, his employment records show he joined something called Project Echo with the Defense Department. Then in 2009, everything stops. Project Echo. The name sent a chill through Morgan. Get me everything you can on Project Echo. The waterfront was crowded with tourists. Morgan walked slowly, studying every face, remembering another time by another body of water. Summer of '58. The Pearl River had been low that year, revealing sandbars where they built forts and recorded radio shows about their adventures. Your voice makes even made-up stuff sound real, Billy had said, like the truth is hiding inside your words. Later that summer, they'd found a cave where their voices echoed strangely, creating overlapping patterns that seemed to change how you felt when you heard them. It's like magic, Billy had whispered. Certain echoes make you feel things. Happy, sad, scared. I bet the government would pay $1 million to know how it works. They'd called it the Echo Cave and spent weeks recording different patterns, studying how they affected people who listened. Just a childhood game, nothing more. So, why did the memory now fill Morgan with unease? His phone rang, jolting him back to the present. It was his private investigator. Mr. Freeman, I found something odd. Project Echo was officially a sound engineering program for military applications, but it went dark in 1987. The strange thing is, many of the scientists, including Billy Thornton, were later associated with a private company called Resonance Technologies. What's unusual about that? Resonance Technologies is owned by Victor Schaefer. Morgan stopped walking. Victor Schaefer owned the largest media conglomerate in America, television networks, radio stations, streaming platforms, and he'd been aggressively pursuing Morgan for an exclusive interview for years. There's more, the PI continued. Thornton worked directly under Schaefer until 2009, when he filed a formal complaint with the FCC. The complaint was sealed, and that's when Thornton disappeared. As Morgan hung up, a homeless man approached, hand outstretched. Morgan reached for his wallet, then froze when the man spoke. He said you'd come looking. The man wasn't asking for money. He said to tell you that voices can change the world, but some changes come at a price. Where is he? Morgan asked urgently. The man shook his head. Can't say, but he left this. He handed Morgan a small object, an ancient cassette tape labeled Echo Cave 1958. Thank you, Morgan said, pressing money into the man's hand. When he returned to his hotel room, Morgan found it had been searched, subtly, professionally, but unmistakably. His files were slightly rearranged, the hotel map folded differently. His phone rang, unknown number. Hello? Morgan answered. Silence, then a familiar voice. Meet me where stories begin. Midnight. The line went dead. Morgan knew exactly where Billy meant. The Charleston Historical Society housed the oldest collection of recorded oral histories in the South. As dusk fell over Charleston, Morgan prepared to meet his past, unaware that by morning everything he thought he knew about his life, his career and his famous voice would be forever changed. The Charleston Historical Society stood like a sentinel of the past, its columned facade illuminated by strategically placed spotlights. At 11:45 p.m., Morgan arrived alone, having insisted his security team remain at a distance. The night curator, a graduate student named Lisa, who nearly dropped her coffee when she recognized him, had been persuaded to let him in after hours. We close at 5, but, she stammered, unlocking the heavy wooden doors. I appreciate your discretion, Morgan said, his voice carrying that familiar warmth that had narrated countless nature documentaries. I'm researching a project and needed to see your oral history collection. It wasn't entirely a lie. He was researching something, just not what she assumed. The voice recordings are in the basement archives, Lisa said, leading him down a spiral staircase. Some date back to the 1880s, earliest field recordings of former slaves, Civil War veterans, indigenous storytellers. The basement was climate-controlled, lined with preservation cases containing ancient recording devices, wax cylinders, wire recorders, reel-to-reels, and rows of meticulously catalogued tapes. I'll be upstairs if you need anything, Lisa offered. Thank you, I shouldn't be long. When her footsteps faded, Morgan checked his watch. 11:55 p.m. He moved deeper into the archive, past glass cases displaying the evolution of sound recording. Technology. At the far end stood an original Thomas Edison phonograph from 1877, the first device that captured the human voice. Voices leave imprints, came a voice from the shadows, like fingerprints in the air. Morgan turned. Billy emerged from between two tall shelves, thinner than Morgan remembered, but with those same intense eyes that had once seen possibilities in everything. His clothes were worn but clean, his salt and pepper beard neatly trimmed. The leather satchel hung at his side, its strap clutched protectively in his hand. "Billy," Morgan breathed. For a moment, neither spoke. Two boys from Mississippi, now men in their 70s, separated by fame and secrets and years of silence. "You look good, Morgan," Billy finally said, a ghost of his old smile appearing. "The years have been kinder to you than me." "What happened to you?" "I searched for years after you disappeared." Billy's face darkened. "Not here, too many years." He glanced significantly at the recording equipment surrounding them. Even old technology can still listen. He led Morgan to a small listening booth designed for researchers. Once inside, he removed a device from his satchel and switched it on. A soft hum filled the space. "Sonic disruptor," Billy explained. "Prevents any recording. Now we can talk." Morgan studied his old friend, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned the room. "You're frightened." "With good reason. I've been running for 15 years. Billy sat, suddenly looking every year of his age. "I didn't want you involved, but now they know you're looking. You're in danger too." "Who's they?" "The people who weaponized our childhood game." Morgan's mind flashed to the echo cave, their experiments with overlapping sounds. "I don't understand. Remember how certain echo patterns made people feel things. How we could make Mrs. Peterson cry just by playing back our recordings at the right frequency." Billy leaned forward. "It wasn't a game, Morgan. We'd stumbled onto something real, subsonic frequencies that influence emotional states." "That was just kids playing?" Morgan protested. "That's what I thought too, until Project Echo." Billy pulled a worn journal from his satchel. "In 1974, I was recruited for a government program studying sound's psychological effects. They'd found our childhood recordings in a university study I'd participated in. They'd been watching me for years." Morgan struggled to process this. "A government program? For what purpose?" "Initially, therapeutic applications, sound waves that could calm PTSD, treat depression. But then the military intelligence wing took over. They discovered certain voices, certain patterns could do more than affect emotions. They could implant subliminal commands." An uncomfortable chill crept up Morgan's spine. "Mind control, that's science fiction." "I wish it were." Billy opened the journal, revealing complex waveform diagrams. "We created audio patterns that, when embedded in normal speech, create a suggestible state. The right voice delivering these patterns can implant subtle suggestions that listeners act on without realizing why." "And my voice," Morgan asked, already suspecting the answer, "is perfect for it. The resonance, the timbre, the patterns. You naturally hit the frequencies we spent years trying to artificially create." Billy's eyes were haunted. "When your career took off, they noticed, analyzed every film, every narration. Your voice hits 37 of the 40 key frequency patterns needed for maximum suggestibility." Morgan remembered the articles Billy had been researching at the library. "That's why Schaefer wants to interview me." Billy's head snapped up. "You know about Schaefer?" "My investigator found the connection. Victor Schaefer, Resonance Technologies." "Then you're already deeper than I wanted." Billy paced the small room. "When Project Echo was officially terminated, Schaefer privatized the technology, created Resonance Technologies as a front. Why do you think he owns radio stations, news networks, streaming platforms? It's all about audio delivery systems." Sudden noise outside the booth made Billy freeze. He quickly checked his device, then relaxed slightly. "Just the curator upstairs." Morgan tried to organize his thoughts. "You filed a complaint with the FCC in 2009. I discovered Schaefer was embedding subliminal patterns in broadcast news, influencing public opinion on political issues. I had evidence the night before my testimony. My house was ransacked, my evidence stolen. I barely escaped." Billy's voice cracked. "I've been living off-grid since then, gathering new evidence, monitoring Schaefer's activities." "Why not go to the authorities? The same authorities who classified my initial complaint. Schaefer has connections in every agency." Billy opened his satchel, removing the old cassette tape Morgan had received earlier. Our Echo Cave recordings, the foundation of everything they built. Morgan took the tape gently. And now? Schaefer knows you're looking for me. He'll use it, offer you. That interview he's wanted. Try to get you in front of his microphones. Billy's eyes locked with Morgan's. Your voice reaching millions embedded with his patterns. The perfect delivery system. The implications were staggering. Morgan's voice, the instrument that had built his career, brought him fame and fortune, could be weaponized. I need to know everything, Billy, every detail. Billy hesitated, then nodded. Not here, meet me tomorrow. There's a place. The booth door suddenly flew open. Lisa stood there, eyes wide with fear. Someone's here, she whispered urgently. Men in suits. They showed government badges. They're coming downstairs. Billy was on his feet instantly, satchel clutched to his chest. Back exit? Through the preservation room, Lisa pointed. Morgan, take this. Billy thrust a small flash drive into his hand. Everything I've gathered, evidence, recordings, names. Whatever happens to me, get this to Senator Eleanor Hayes. She's been investigating Schaefer. Before Morgan could protest, Billy was moving, slipping through the door Lisa held open. Morgan followed, hearing heavy footsteps on the spiral staircase. They hurried through rows of preservation cases. Lisa pointed to a service door. That leads to the alley. Billy paused, gripping Morgan's shoulder. Trust no one's voice, not even mine, unless we're face to face. Then he was gone, disappearing through the door into the Charleston night. Morgan barely made it back to the main archive before 3 men in dark suits appeared at the bottom of the staircase. Mr. Freeman, one said smoothly. What a surprise. We're fans of your work. His hand closed around the flash drive in his pocket as Morgan prepared for the performance of his lifetime. I'm researching a role, Morgan said with practiced ease, gesturing to the oral history archives surrounding them. A linguistics professor who studies dying dialects. The curator kindly allowed me after-hours access. The men exchanged glances. The one who had spoken, tall with steel-gray hair and military posture, smiled thinly. Special Agent Thomas Reardon, Department of Homeland Security. His credentials appeared briefly before disappearing into his jacket. We're conducting a security investigation and received alerts about unauthorized access to this facility. That would be my fault, Lisa interjected nervously. Mr. Freeman requested privacy for his research, and You've been most helpful, Morgan interrupted smoothly, but I've finished for the evening. Gentlemen, if you'll excuse me, it's rather late. Agent Reardon stepped aside with rehearsed courtesy, but his eyes remained cold. Of course, though we'd appreciate a brief statement regarding anyone else you might have encountered here tonight. I've been alone with my thoughts and these remarkable recordings, Morgan replied, moving toward the stairs. The voices of the past are company enough. As Morgan climbed the stairs, he felt Reardon's gaze boring into his back. Outside, his driver was waiting, clearly relieved when Morgan emerged unaccompanied. The hotel, sir? No, Morgan decided. Take me somewhere public. They ended up at a 24-hour diner off King Street, where Morgan sat in a corner booth, nursing a coffee and examining the flash drive. His security team waited discreetly at another table, keeping watch for unfamiliar faces. He couldn't risk accessing the drive on any device connected to networks. Billy's warnings echoed in his mind. Trust no one's voice. Morgan's phone vibrated, a text from an unknown number. Penthouse, Dock Street Hotel, 1 hour, come alone or Billy suffers. Attached was a photo. Billy handcuffed to a chair, a bruise. Darkening his left cheek, Morgan's security chief noticed his expression. Problem, sir? No, Morgan lied smoothly. Just festival business. He needed to think. Going alone was dangerous, but involving others could be worse. I need to make a private call, he told his team, stepping outside. Instead of calling anyone, he flagged a passing taxi. Dock Street Hotel, he instructed, sending a quick text to his driver that he'd meet them at the hotel later. The Dock Street Hotel's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the historic building. Morgan took the elevator up, mentally preparing for whatever awaited. When the doors opened, he was greeted by a luxurious suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Charleston Harbor. Victor Schaefer stood by the window, swirling amber liquid in a crystal tumbler. He was younger than Morgan expected, perhaps 50, with silver-streaked dark hair and the casual confidence of extreme wealth. "Morgan Freeman," Schaefer smiled, extending his hand. "I've waited years for this meeting." Morgan ignored the hand. "Where's Billy?" Schaefer's smile didn't falter. "William is resting comfortably. Please sit." He gestured to a seating area where recording equipment had been professionally arranged, a studio-quality microphone on a stand, acoustic panels positioned strategically. "I came prepared," Morgan noted, remaining standing. "I'm an opportunist, finding you and Thornton in the same city. Too perfect." Schaefer set down his glass. "I've pursued an interview with you for years." "This isn't an interview. It's coercion. Semantics. Won't you sit? We have much to discuss about Project Echo, your unique vocal properties, and William's unfortunate paranoia." Morgan's eyes narrowed. "I want to see Billy first." Schaefer sighed, pressed a button on his phone. A side door opened, and 2 men escorted Billy in. He looked disheveled but unharmed beyond the bruise visible in the photo. "Morgan," Billy said tiredly, "you shouldn't have come." "Quite the reunion," Schaefer commented. "Childhood friends separated by fame and, shall we call it, divergent ethical frameworks." "Let him go," Morgan demanded. "Whatever you want from me." "What I want," Schaefer interrupted, "is simple. A series of recordings. Your voice, my script. Nothing that would seem unusual to your fans, perhaps a documentary narration, some audiobook passages. Embedded with your subliminal patterns," Morgan finished. "Ah, so William has shared our little technological marvel." Schaefer looked pleased. "Yes. Your voice is uniquely suited to carry the patterns. Think of the possibilities, Morgan. Your voice already commands attention, inspires trust. Combined with our technology, you could literally change minds, shape opinions, redirect entire cultural conversations." Billy struggled against his captors. "It's mind control, Morgan. Don't listen to him." "Not mind control," Schaefer corrected. "Mind suggestion, subtle influence. We can't make people do what they fundamentally oppose, but we can nudge their existing tendencies." He walked to a laptop connected to the recording equipment. "I'll demonstrate." He pressed play. Morgan's voice filled the room, a clip from a documentary he'd narrated years ago about ocean conservation. As the familiar words played, Morgan felt an inexplicable urge to sit down, which he resisted. "How you feel it, don't you?" Schaefer smiled. "The gentle compulsion to sit. We added the pattern to your existing recording. Imagine what we could do with fresh material, specifically designed for our purposes." "Why me? There are other trusted voices. None with your particular frequencies. We've analyzed thousands. Celebrities, politicians, respected journalists. None hit the precise patterns needed for maximum effectiveness." Schaefer gestured to the microphone. "Your voice is uniquely powerful, a natural gift." Morgan glanced at Billy, who shook his head minutely. "And if I refuse?" Schaefer's pleasant expression hardened. "Then William faces charges of treason for stealing classified research. You face obstruction, conspiracy, your legacy dismantled by scandal. Or," he gestured to the microphone, 15 minutes of recording, and you both walk away. William disappears properly this time. You continue your illustrious career. "Don't do it," Billy urged. "My evidence, the flash drive?" Schaefer laughed. "Already located and neutralized. The tracking beacon inside activated the moment it was removed from Thornton's signal-blocking satchel." Morgan's hand moved unconsciously to his pocket. "Yes, the one you're carrying is now empty. Data wiped remotely. Clever technology, isn't it? Like our voice patterns, invisible until it's too late." Morgan's mind raced. If the flash drive was empty, he had nothing to bargain with, no evidence to expose Schaefer. "What guarantee do I have that you'll let Billy go?" "My word as a businessman," Schaefer replied, "and the simple fact that once I have your recordings, William becomes irrelevant. A homeless man with conspiracy theories? Who would believe him? Against your voice telling the world otherwise?" Morgan studied the microphone. His voice had always been his instrument, his gift. Now it could become a weapon, or his friend's salvation. "I want to speak with Billy, alone." Schaefer considered this. 5 minutes. The room is monitored. He nodded to the guards, who released Billy before filing out with Schaefer. The moment. They were alone. Billy rushed to Morgan, whispering urgently, "The flash drive is a decoy. I knew they'd track it. The real evidence is hidden in plain sight." He tapped his temple significantly. "The Echo Cave recording you received, it contains everything encoded in the background noise, the patterns themselves, proving how they work." "Where is it?" "Your hotel room, in the tape player I planted during their search. But you need the original Echo Cave recording to decode it, the one from your childhood." Morgan remembered. "I have it, in my memorabilia collection back home." "They're listening," Billy warned, his voice returning to normal volume. "You have to make them believe you'll cooperate." The door opened as if on cue. Schaefer returned, smiling confidently. "Have you reached a decision, Mr. Freeman?" Morgan looked at Billy, then at the microphone. His famous voice had narrated the journey of penguins, guided viewers through the cosmos, and brought gravitas to countless stories. Now it would tell one more, perhaps his most important. "I'll do it," Morgan said, "but I have conditions." "Reasonable conditions, I'm sure," Schaefer smiled, gesturing toward the microphone. "Though I should remind you that your position isn't exactly one of strength." "I won't record anything tonight," Morgan stated firmly. "I'm tired, and voice work requires rest. Any professional would tell you that." Schaefer's smile tightened. "We have a limited window of opportunity." "You've waited years for my voice," Morgan interrupted. "Another day won't matter. I'll review your script tomorrow, record in the evening when my voice is at its best." After a tense moment, Schaefer nodded. "Very well. Tomorrow evening, 8 p.m., my private studio." He handed Morgan a business card with an address. "Don't disappoint me, Mr. Freeman. William's future depends on your performance." "And he stays with me until then," Morgan added. "Insurance for both of us?" "Absolutely not. Then no deal." Morgan moved toward the door. "I'm sure the press would be interested in why Homeland Security is detaining a renowned actor in Charleston." The threat hung in the air. Morgan could see Schaefer calculating. The risks, the potential exposure. "Fine," Schaefer finally relented. "William stays with you, but you'll both be monitored. Any attempt to contact authorities or leave the city won't happen," Morgan assured him. "We'll see you tomorrow evening." 20 minutes later, Morgan and Billy sat in silence as the car carried them back to the hotel. They'd both spotted the tail vehicle, a black SUV keeping a discreet distance. "They're watching," Billy murmured, barely moving his lips. "And listening." Morgan nodded slightly, understanding. Nothing could be said openly until they were somewhere secure. At the hotel, Morgan dismissed his security team for the night, despite their concerns about his unexpected guest. Once inside his suite, Billy immediately began moving around, checking for surveillance devices. "Bathroom," he whispered when he found nothing. "Run the shower." Inside the bathroom, with water masking their conversation, Billy spoke freely for the first time. "Schaefer's overconfident. He thinks he's won." Billy's eyes gleamed with the same intensity Morgan remembered from their childhood schemes. "But I've been playing this game longer than he realizes." "The tape player?" Morgan asked. Billy nodded. "Custom modified to look ordinary. When they searched your room, they saw an old man's nostalgic possession, not evidence." He leaned closer. "The cassette contains everything the flash drive did, plus recordings of Schaefer discussing the program. How do we access it without them knowing? We need a secure laptop, one never connected to any network." Billy thought for a moment. "And a way to get out from under surveillance long enough to contact Senator Hayes." Morgan considered this. "My driver keeps a laptop in the car for me to review scripts, never connected to Wi-Fi security protocol." "Perfect. Now we need a distraction." Billy turned off the shower. "Let's get some rest. Tomorrow will require perfect timing." They emerged from the bathroom, speaking loudly enough to be heard by any listening devices. "Thanks for the shower, Morgan. Been a while since I had hot water." "The sofa pulls out into a bed," Morgan replied. "Get some sleep, old friend." As Billy settled onto the sofa, Morgan moved to the small desk where an antique-looking cassette player sat. He pressed play casually, as if checking it worked. Through the tiny speaker came the sounds of their childhood, two boys laughing, experimenting with echoes in a Mississippi cave. "Still works," Morgan commented, rewinding the tape. That night, sleep came fitfully. Morgan's mind raced with implications of what Billy had revealed. His voice, the instrument of his success, had been coveted not just for its artistic quality, but for its potential as a weapon of influence. How many other voices had been analyzed? How many broadcasts already carried embedded patterns? Morning brought room service breakfast and renewed determination. As they ate, Morgan outlined his plan in vague terms, knowing they were being monitored. "I need to prepare my voice before this evening's session," he told Billy. "My usual routine includes a visit to a steam room, then vocal exercises." "The hotel has a spa," Billy replied, understanding the subtext. An hour later, they descended to the hotel's luxury spa, their tail following at a distance. The attendant recognized Morgan. "Immediately. Mr. Freeman, we're honored to have you. Your regular steam treatment?" "Yes, and for my friend as well." Morgan gestured to Billy. "Privacy is essential for vocal preparation." "Of course, sir. The steam room is completely private. No electronic devices allowed inside. Damages the mechanisms. Perfect. No surveillance. Possible." Once inside the steam room, Morgan finally spoke freely. "We have maybe 20 minutes before they get suspicious. What exactly is on that tape?" Project Echo's complete history. Evidence of Schaefer using the technology in broadcasts during the 2016 election. Names of officials who helped bury my complaint. Billy wiped condensation from his face. Most importantly, audio samples that demonstrate the patterns. Proof. They exist and how they work. And you need my childhood recording to decode it. The original echo cave patterns are the key to unlocking the encrypted data. Your voice, my algorithm. Poetic, isn't it? Morgan shook his head, processing everything. "Why didn't you come to me sooner, Billy? All these years." "I tried early. On. Sent letters your agency intercepted, called numbers that were screened. Eventually I realized approaching you directly would put you in danger." Billy's eyes held decades of isolation. "Besides, you were living our dream. One of us made it that counted for something." The steam thickened around them, bringing with it memories of Mississippi humidity, two boys recording stories in the summer heat. "What's our next move?" Morgan asked. "We need that laptop and a way to contact Hayes securely." Morgan thought for a moment. "My driver can bring the laptop. As for Hayes," he smiled slightly, "being Morgan Freeman occasionally has its advantages." When they emerged from the steam room, Morgan approached the spa receptionist. "Could you arrange for my driver to bring my laptop? I've just remembered some script notes I need to review." "Of course, Mr. Freeman." While waiting, Morgan casually asked if the spa had a private meditation room. "Yes, sir." "Would you like to use it after your treatment?" "Please." 15 minutes. Half silence helped center my voice. 20 minutes later, Morgan sat alone in the meditation room with the laptop. Billy waited outside with their watchdogs, engaging them in a rambling conversation about voice techniques. Morgan inserted the cassette into the modified player, connected it to the laptop using a cable Billy had concealed in the cassette case, and waited as the program automatically began extracting the hidden data. Files appeared on screen, hundreds of documents, audio recordings, video clips. Morgan quickly scanned them, his blood running cold at what he discovered. Transcripts of secret meetings where Schaefer demonstrated opinion modification to potential clients. Audio analysis showing how specific broadcast segments correlated with shifting public sentiments on key issues. Most disturbingly, a proposed national address where Morgan's voice would introduce a special message from the president, the perfect Trojan horse for the most powerful application of the technology yet. At the bottom of the screen, a message appeared. Data decryption complete. Original echo cave recording required for verification protocol. Morgan's hand tightened around the phone. He needed to get this evidence to Senator Hayes immediately, but more importantly, he needed to retrieve the original recording from his home in Mississippi. The meditation room door opened slightly. Billy's face appeared. "Time's up, they're getting suspicious." Morgan quickly copied the files to an encrypted drive Billy had provided, then shut down the laptop. He slipped the tiny drive into his shoe just as Schaefer's men appeared behind. "Billy, productive meditation, Mr. Freeman?" one asked, eyes suspicious. "Very," Morgan replied, his voice revealing nothing. "I believe I'm ready for tonight's performance." But as they returned to the hotel room, Morgan's phone vibrated with a message that complicated everything. Script change. Recording session. Moved to 2 p.m. today. Car arriving in 1 hour. No negotiation. They're accelerating the timeline, Billy muttered, pacing the hotel room. Schaefer must suspect something. Morgan stared at the message, mind racing. We need more time. We don't. Have it? Billy checked his watch. 1 hour until they come for us. Morgan made a decision. He picked up the hotel phone and dialed the front desk. This is Morgan Freeman. Please connect me to Robert Redford's room. Billy's eyebrows shot up. Robert Redford is staying here? The desk clerk asked, surprised. He arrived late last night, private registration. Room 712. One moment, sir. Billy looked at Morgan questioningly. There is no room 712 in this hotel, Morgan whispered, covering the mouthpiece. And Redford isn't in Charleston. After several minutes of confusion, the desk clerk returned. I'm sorry, Mr. Freeman. We have no record of Mr. Redford. That's impossible, Morgan replied, injecting practiced indignation into his voice. We have a meeting scheduled. Please check again. As the clerk promised to investigate, Morgan hung up. That buys us a distraction. The hotel staff will be searching for a non-existent Redford registration, and Schaefer's men will be monitoring that wild goose chase. Smart, Billy nodded. But we still need to get out of here. Morgan moved to the window, studying the street below. My driver is still waiting with the car. If we can reach him, they're watching all exits. Not all of them. Morgan gestured toward the service entrance, visible from their window. When I was filming in Charleston last year, I used that door to avoid photographers. Morgan called his driver. James, I need a quick exit. Service entrance, 10 minutes. Next, he called the hotel manager directly. This is Morgan Freeman. I'm dealing with an uncomfortable situation involving an overzealous fan. I need to use your service entrance again. Of course, Mr. Freeman. I'll send security to escort you. No security. Just have the door unlocked. Morgan paused. And I'd appreciate your discretion. With the arrangements made, Morgan nodded to Billy. Let's go. They left most of their belongings behind to avoid suspicion, taking only the cassette, player and the laptop. In the hallway, they headed toward the ice machine room rather than the elevators, which opened to reveal a service stairwell. 4 minutes later, they emerged through the service entrance where James waited with the car. They slipped inside and James pulled away calmly, avoiding any sudden movements that might attract attention. Where to, sir? James asked. Charleston Executive Airport, Morgan instructed. Call ahead. Tell them to prepare my plane. Your plane isn't here, sir, James reminded him. You flew commercial to the festival. Then charter one, whatever's available, immediately. As James made the arrangements, Morgan turned to Billy. We need to get to Mississippi, my home. That's where the original recording is. Schaefer will check commercial flights, private airfields too, Billy warned. That's why we won't be on the manifest. An old friend is handling this personally. Morgan dialed a number. Senator Hayes, please. Tell her it's Morgan Freeman. Billy's eyes widened. You know Eleanor Hayes? He whispered. We met during a fundraiser. Last year. She's been investigating media consolidation, Schaefer's companies specifically. After a brief hold, a woman's voice came through. Morgan Freeman, this is unexpected. Senator Hayes, I apologize for the abruptness, but I have information regarding Victor Schaefer that you'll want to see immediately. I believe it connects to your investigation. A pause. I'm listening. Not over the phone. I need transportation from Charleston to my Mississippi property off the record. Another pause. That's an unusual request from an actor. This is about Project Echo, Senator. Voice pattern manipulation technology. William Thornton is with me. The line went silent for several seconds. Thornton? The whistleblower who disappeared. The same. Stay where you are. I'm sending someone. 1 hour. Charleston Executive Airport was small, catering to private jets and charter flights. James parked in a secluded area away from the main terminal. Wait here, Morgan instructed. If anyone asks, you're waiting for a client. Inside a private lounge, Morgan and Billy reviewed the files on the laptop while waiting for Hayes' contact. These are broadcast segments from major news networks, Billy explained, pointing to waveform analyses. See these patterns? They're the same frequency manipulations we discovered in the echo cave, refined and embedded in normal speech. When viewers hear them, their brains become subtly more receptive to specific ideas mentioned immediately afterward. Morgan studied. The patterns. How effective is it? On its own, it might shift opinions by a few percentage points, but combined with repetition and targeted delivery to specific demographic groups. Billy let the implication hang. Enough to influence elections, public policy, enough to change the course of nations over time. Schaefer has been deploying this for years, starting small, testing boundaries. A shadow fell across the table. They looked up to see a tall woman in aviator sunglasses. "Mr. Freeman, I'm Captain Meredith Chen. Senator Hayes sent me." 20 minutes later, they were airborne in a sleek government jet. "The senator is very interested in what you have, Captain," Chen said once they reached cruising altitude. "She's been trying to prove Schaefer's media manipulation for years, without understanding the mechanism," Billy added. "Exactly. His companies show unusual influence patterns, but we couldn't identify how." She studied Billy. "Your FCC complaint disappeared very thoroughly, Mr. Thornton." "Not thoroughly enough," Billy patted the laptop. Morgan stared out the window, processing everything. "How deep does this go? How many people are involved?" "Schaefer has powerful friends," Chen replied. "Politicians, intelligence officials, military contractors. Project Echo was officially terminated, but the technology was too valuable to abandon." "And my voice is the perfect delivery system," Morgan said quietly. "Your particular vocal patterns create a natural resonance that maximizes the effectiveness. It's why Schaefer has pursued you so aggressively for interviews." The plane banked slightly, heading west toward Mississippi. "Senator Hayes has arranged security at your property," Chen continued. "We'll retrieve the original recording and get you both to a secure location in Washington." "What about Schaefer?" Billy asked. "By now he knows we've fled. The senator has initiated containment protocols. Schaefer's movements are being monitored, his communications under surveillance." Morgan leaned back in his seat, the weight of everything settling on him. His voice, the instrument that had brought pleasure to millions through films, documentaries, and narrations, had almost become a tool for manipulation. "How long until we land?" he asked. "Approximately 1 hour," Chen replied. "Senator Hayes will meet us in Washington. She's convening a closed committee session to review your evidence." Billy looked out the window, his face reflecting in the glass. 15 years, he murmured. 15 years of running, hiding, gathering evidence, being dismissed as paranoid. Morgan placed a hand on his old friend's shoulder. "You kept your promise, Billy. You protected the truth about voices and their power. Now we use that truth to stop Schaefer." As Mississippi appeared below them, Morgan prepared to face the memories waiting at his childhood home, and the recording. That had started everything 50 years ago in a cave by the Pearl River, where two boys discovered that voices could indeed change the world. Morgan's Mississippi property sat on 20 acres of land, bordered by ancient oak trees draped with Spanish moss. The main house, a modern structure of glass and wood, stood in stark contrast to the rural surroundings. As their convoy of unmarked government vehicles approached, Morgan felt the strange dissonance of bringing his past and present lives into direct collision. "Security team has cleared the perimeter," Captain Chen reported as they pulled into the long driveway. "No signs of Schaefer's people yet, but we're assuming they're not far behind." Billy stared out the window, taking in the expansive property. "Quite a step up from Greenwood," he remarked quietly. "The recording is in my study," Morgan said as they exited the vehicles. "I keep a collection of memorabilia from throughout my career. The Echo Cave tape is in a box of childhood keepsakes." Inside, the house was warm with natural wood and comfortable furnishings, not the ostentatious mansion many might expect from a Hollywood star. Morgan led them directly to his study, a book-lined room with large windows overlooking a small lake. He moved to a cabinet and unlocked it, revealing shelves of carefully preserved items, his first script, early theater programs, awards, and personal mementos. From a wooden box labeled Mississippi, he withdrew a small cassette tape in a faded plastic case. "Our original recording," Morgan said, holding it reverently. "Summer of 1958. Billy took it with trembling hands. I can't believe you kept it all these years. Some voices you never forget, Morgan replied simply. Captain Chen organized a security perimeter, while Dr. Lillian Chen, a former project echo scientist whom Senator Hayes had brought into her investigation, set up specialized equipment to analyze the recordings. Dr. Chen was a precise woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked black hair and keen eyes behind rectangular glasses. She worked methodically, connecting Billy's modified cassette player to an array of specialized equipment. Fascinating, she murmured as she studied the waveform patterns. The embedded frequencies are remarkably sophisticated for technology that supposedly doesn't exist. Can you explain exactly how this works? Morgan asked, watching as colorful patterns danced across her monitor screen. Dr. Chen nodded, gesturing for them to observe. Human brains naturally resonate with certain sound frequencies. It's why music affects our emotions, why certain voices soothe or agitate us. She pointed to a particular pattern. Project Echo discovered that specific vocal frequencies can create what we called open states in neural pathways. Like hypnosis, Morgan asked, more subtle. The listener remains fully conscious, but becomes more receptive to ideas presented immediately after the pattern. She looked up at Morgan. Your voice naturally contains many of these frequencies, particularly in your lower registers. That's not unusual in itself. Many successful actors and speakers have naturally persuasive vocal patterns. But mine is special somehow, Morgan said. Extraordinarily so. Your vocal patterns contain 37 of the 40 key frequency combinations that maximize the open state effect. Most trained speakers might hit 15 to 20 naturally, making me the perfect delivery system for Schaefer's embedded messages, Morgan finished grimly. Precisely. Dr. Chen inserted the original Echo Cave recording. Now let's see what you boys discovered all those years ago. As the tape played, the crude recording quality couldn't mask the clear voices of two excited children. Young Morgan and Billy could be heard experimenting with echoes, repeating phrases, laughing at the strange effects. Try it like you're telling a ghost story, young Billy urged on the recording. The darkness hides ancient secrets, young Morgan intoned, his voice already showing hints of its future resonance. The playback continued as the boys discovered that certain words, when echoed in their cave, created strange, overlapping patterns that made your brain feel funny, as young Billy described it. Dr. Chen stared at her monitor, astonishment evident on her face. Incredible. You stumbled onto subsonic resonance patterns that trained scientists didn't formally identify until decades later. She shook her head. The specific acoustic properties of your cave created perfect conditions for generating these patterns. We called it our magic voice trick, Billy said softly. We found we could make people feel happy, sad, or even slightly confused by playing back certain echo combinations. Natural acoustic science discovered by children at play, Dr. Chen murmured, adjusting her equipment. With this original recording, I can decode the encrypted files completely. As she worked, Captain Chen entered the study. Senator Hayes is online. She wants to speak with you both. A secure video call was established, revealing Senator Eleanor Hayes, a formidable woman in her 50s with short gray hair and piercing blue eyes. Mr. Freeman, Mr. Thornton, she nodded crisply. Dr. Chen has shared some preliminary findings. The evidence appears substantial. It's worse than we thought, Senator, Billy said. Schaefer wasn't just planning to use Morgan's voice for subtle influence. He was preparing something much bigger. Billy opened files on the laptop showing a planned national broadcast, featuring Morgan introducing a presidential address. Embedded in the script were concentrated patterns designed to create maximum receptivity. This would reach hundreds of millions of viewers simultaneously, Dr. Chen explained. The potential impact on public perception would be unprecedented. Senator Hayes's expression darkened. The timing coincides with several major policy announcements. This goes beyond media manipulation into territory I can only describe as a soft coup attempt. What's our next move? Morgan asked. We need you both in Washington immediately. A secure military transport is being arranged. Hayes leaned forward. Mr. Freeman, you understand what this means? Your voice, the very thing that built your career, has been targeted as a weapon. I understand, Morgan replied gravely. There's something else you should know, Dr. Chen interjected, looking up from her equipment. I've analyzed your recent film narrations, Mr. Freeman. Several already contain subtle embedded patterns, not at manipulation levels, but test implementations. They've been experimenting with your voice without your knowledge. The revelation hit Morgan like a physical blow. His narrations, his art, had been weaponized without his consent. The thought of millions listening, unknowingly affected by hidden patterns in his trusted voice, made him feel violated. "How long until transport arrives?" he asked Captain Chen, his voice tight with controlled anger. 40 minutes, she replied. But we have another problem. Our perimeter sensors just picked up approaching vehicles, multiple signatures coming fast. Schaefer, Billy said, eyes wide. Or worse, Captain Chen replied grimly. Local police vehicles, but they're not responding to any official dispatch. Dr. Chen hurriedly began packing her equipment. I need 10 more minutes to complete the decryption process. You may not have 10 minutes, Captain Chen warned, checking her weapon. Mr. Freeman, is there another way out of here? A route not obvious from property records? Morgan nodded, memories of childhood exploration surfacing. There's an old service road that runs behind the property. It connects to County Road 27 about a mile east. Perfect. I'll arrange for alternate extraction. Captain Chen dispatched her team to defensive positions. As sirens became audible in the distance, Morgan looked at Billy, his oldest friend, who had sacrificed everything to protect the world from this invisible threat. All these years, Morgan said quietly, you've been a ghost living in shadows while I stood in the spotlight, yet you were the one truly protecting people. Different paths, same purpose, Billy replied. We both used our voices. You to inspire, me to warn. He smiled faintly. Now we use them together. The sirens grew louder as Dr. Chen announced, Decryption complete. I have everything. Outside, emergency lights flashed through the trees as Captain Chen returned. It's time to go. Our escape window is closing. As they prepared to leave, Morgan took one last look at his study, at the mementos of a career built on a voice that people trusted, a voice that had almost become the perfect weapon. The escape from Morgan's Mississippi property unfolded with military precision. Captain Chen's team created a diversion at the main entrance, while Morgan, Billy, and Dr. Chen slipped out through the service road in an unmarked SUV. As they drove away, Morgan watched through the rear window as false police cruisers, Schaefer's men, surrounded his home. They'll search everything, he said quietly. They won't find what they're looking for, Billy reassured him, patting the secure case containing both cassettes and Dr. Chen's equipment. Their extraction point was a small private airfield 20 miles away where a military transport waited. Once airborne, Dr. Chen immediately resumed her analysis, connecting her equipment to the plane's power supply. I've been studying the patterns embedded in Schaefer's script for you, she explained, showing Morgan pages marked with highlighted sections. These phrases, delivered in your particular cadence, would create a powerful, suggestible state in listeners. Morgan studied the script with growing disgust. It appeared innocuous, an introduction to a presidential address about national unity, but now that he knew what to look for, he could see how certain phrases were constructed to exploit his vocal patterns. Is there a way to counter this? He asked. Dr. Chen nodded. That's what I've been working on. If certain frequencies create open states, others can create resistance or awareness. She adjusted her glasses. Think of it as a vaccine, a weakened form of the pattern that helps the brain recognize and resist the full version. As Dr. Chen explained the science, Morgan felt a plan forming. What if I did the interview? He suggested. Billy looked up sharply. What? Not Schaefer's version. A counter-interview, using these same patterns but modified to immunize rather than influence. Dr. Chen considered this. Theoretically possible. I could help you modify your delivery to neutralize or even reverse the effects. Captain Chen joined their conversation. Senator Hayes just informed me that Schaefer has announced a special broadcast tomorrow evening featuring you, Mr. Freeman. Me? Morgan asked, surprised. He's using AI-generated clips of your voice from previous recordings, crude by Project Echo standards, but effective enough for his purposes. Then we need to beat him to it, Morgan decided. A real broadcast. with the real me. It's risky, Billy warned. Schaefer has connections throughout the media landscape. Not everywhere, Captain Chen interjected. Senator Hayes has a secure channel arranged through independent media. It would reach millions, possibly billions online. For the next several hours, as their plane crossed the country toward Washington, D.C., Morgan worked with Dr. Chen to understand the counter-patterns. It wasn't just about changing words. It required subtle shifts in pitch, resonance, and timing. The human voice is remarkably complex, Dr. Chen explained as Morgan practiced a particularly difficult pattern. Over 100 muscles work together to produce speech, creating unique harmonic signatures. Like fingerprints, Morgan nodded, remembering Billy's words at the Historical Society. Exactly. Your vocal fingerprint is particularly effective at carrying these patterns. She handed him a modified script. Try this version. Morgan read the passage, adjusting his delivery as instructed. Dr. Chen monitored the waveforms, occasionally suggesting minor adjustments. Perfect, she finally said. Satisfaction evident in her voice. That delivery pattern creates awareness rather than suggestion. Anyone who hears this will become subtly more resistant to embedded patterns in future broadcasts. A counter-voice, Morgan mused. More powerful than you realize, Billy added. We're not just stopping Schaefer's immediate plan, we're inoculating the public against future attempts. Their plane landed at Andrews Air Force Base shortly after midnight. A small convoy transported them to a secure government facility where Senator Hayes waited. The evidence you've provided is compelling, she told them after reviewing Dr. Chen's findings. But we need to move quickly. Schaefer has friends in high places who could shut this down. How soon can we broadcast? Morgan asked. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern. Prime time for a global audience. She studied Morgan carefully. Are you certain about this? Once you go public, there's no going back. Your career, your legacy, everything changes. Morgan glanced at Billy, who had sacrificed his entire life to expose this truth. Some voices need to be heard, he said simply. Through the night they prepared. Dr. Chen continued refining the counter-patterns while government analysts compiled supporting evidence. Morgan practiced the modified script until the patterns became second nature. At dawn, a message arrived from Schaefer, delivered directly to Senator Hayes's secure facility. He's offering a deal, the senator informed them, her expression grim. Full immunity, generous financial compensation, and a promise to limit the use of the technology in exchange for our silence. He's desperate, Billy observed. He knows we have everything. He's also threatening to release compromising information about key officials if we proceed, Hayes added. He's not going down without a fight. Then we give him one, Morgan said firmly. As the broadcast time approached, Morgan was escorted to a specially prepared studio. The setup was simple: a chair, a neutral background and a camera. No visible microphones, though sensitive equipment captured his voice from optimal angles. Captain Chen entered with an unexpected visitor, a young production assistant from Schaefer's media company. She approached our security team outside, Captain Chen explained. Says she has a message. The young woman looked nervously around the room before focusing on Morgan. Mr. Thornton asked me to tell you something, she said quietly. He said to tell you, remember the echo cave, the third pattern is the key. Morgan and Billy exchanged confused glances. I never sent this message, Billy said. I've been with you the entire time. He was very specific, the assistant insisted. Said it was about your childhood recording, something about the third pattern you discovered. Realization dawned on Billy's face. The reversal pattern. We found that if we played certain echoes backward, they cancelled out the original effect. Dr. Chen immediately reviewed the original recording, finding the section where young Morgan and Billy had accidentally discovered that reversed echoes neutralized their brain-funny effect. She's right, Dr. Chen confirmed, excitement in her voice. This significantly enhances our counter-pattern effectiveness. She looked suspiciously at the assistant. How did you know about this? I don't know anything, the assistant said. I just deliver messages. Mr. Schaefer has me working with a consultant named Daniel Thornton on the broadcast preparations. Daniel, Billy whispered. My middle name. Morgan understood immediately. Schaefer has another ally, Someone inside his organization who knows about our childhood. Someone helping us. With the enhanced counter pattern incorporated, Morgan took his position before the camera. 5 minutes to broadcast, Senator Hayes approached with a final update. Schaefer knows something's happening. He's trying to jam our signal, but we're routing through multiple secure channels. She handed Morgan an earpiece. We'll guide you if anything changes during the broadcast. Morgan nodded, settling into the calm focus that had served him through decades of performances. This would be his most important role yet, playing himself, using his authentic voice to counter a lifetime of potential manipulation. 60 seconds, the director announced. Morgan looked at Billy, who gave him a thumbs up from behind the camera. 30 seconds. Morgan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. 10 seconds, he thought. Of the echo cave, of two boys discovering the power of sound, of voices that could change the world. 3, 2, 1. The red light illuminated, and Morgan Freeman began to speak. "Good morning," Morgan began, his iconic voice carrying the careful modulations Dr. Chen had helped him perfect. "My name is Morgan Freeman. You know me as an actor, a narrator, perhaps a familiar voice that has accompanied documentaries about penguins, the cosmos, or the life of Nelson Mandela." He paused, allowing the natural resonance of his voice to establish the counter-pattern, foundation. "Today I speak to you not as a character, not as a narrator of others' stories, but as someone who has discovered that my voice, the instrument of my life's work, has been targeted for misuse in ways that threaten the very foundation of free thought." In the control room, Dr. Chen monitored the waveform patterns, nodding with satisfaction as Morgan executed the delivery perfectly. Senator Hayes watched a series of screens showing the broadcast spreading across networks, streaming platforms, and social media channels. Despite Schaefer's attempts to block it, the transmission was reaching millions. "Since childhood," Morgan continued, "I have believed in the power of storytelling. The human voice is perhaps our most primal connection, the first thing we recognize as infants, the sound that can soothe or excite, inspire or calm." He shifted to the next critical pattern section. "What you may not know is that certain voices, certain patterns of speech, can do more than evoke emotions. They can create subtle states of heightened receptivity, making listeners more open to ideas presented immediately afterward." Morgan gestured to a screen beside him, where waveform patterns appeared. "This is not science fiction. This is not conspiracy theory. This is documented science that began as a government research project called Project Echo and was later privatized under media mogul Victor Schaefer." At Resonance Technologies headquarters, Victor Schaefer watched Morgan's broadcast with mounting fury. Surrounded by technicians desperately trying to interrupt the transmission, he barked orders into multiple phones. "Shut it down, I don't care how. Claim technical difficulties, copyright infringement, national security, anything." But the broadcast continued spreading, with viewers recording and sharing it faster than Schaefer's team could contain it. On screen, Morgan was explaining how the technology worked, using simple analogies that made the complex science accessible. "Think of your favorite song," he said, "how it affects your mood without conscious effort. Now imagine that effect refined, targeted and embedded within normal speech, undetectable to the conscious mind, but influential to your subconscious." He continued with the carefully structured explanation, each sentence delivering both information and the subtle counterpatterns that would help listeners resist future embedded messaging. "For 15 years, my friend William Thornton has lived in hiding, gathering evidence of how this technology has been deployed in broadcast media to shape public opinion on everything from consumer products to political candidates." The camera widened to reveal Billy sitting nearby. He nodded solemnly at the camera. "Our findings, supported by extensive documentation and scientific analysis, indicate that specific broadcasts containing these embedded patterns have correlated with measurable shifts in public sentiment, beyond what conventional persuasion could achieve." In the control room, an urgent message appeared on Senator Hayes's screen. She spoke into her microphone. "Morgan, Schaefer is broadcasting his own version using AI-generated clips of your voice. We need to address this directly." Without missing a beat, Morgan incorporated the new information. I've just been informed that Victor Schaefer's network is currently broadcasting using artificial versions of my voice. Let me be absolutely clear. That is not me. The technology we're exposing includes the capability to manipulate recorded voices. Morgan leaned forward, his expression intensifying. To demonstrate the power of these techniques, I'm going to tell a simple story. As you listen, you may notice subtle changes in how you perceive my words. He began a seemingly innocuous narrative about a forest, carefully incorporating the strongest counter-pattern sequences. As he spoke, Dr. Chen's monitors showed the patterns taking effect, creating what she had termed neural awareness, a state where listeners became consciously attuned to manipulation attempts. What you just experienced, Morgan explained after finishing the story, was a protective pattern, one that helps your mind recognize and resist embedded influence. In essence, I've just given you a vaccine against the very techniques that have been used without your knowledge or consent. At Resonance Technologies, Schaefer's desperate countermeasures were failing. His AI-generated version of Morgan's voice, while convincing to casual listeners, lacked the authentic vocal fingerprint necessary for effective pattern delivery. Worse, anyone who had heard Morgan's counter-patterns was now noticing the artificial quality of the fake broadcast. "Sir," one technician reported nervously, "our viewership is collapsing. They're all switching to Freeman's actual broadcast." Schaefer's face contorted with rage. "Get me the president. Get me the director of national intelligence. This is a national security matter." But his calls went unanswered. The evidence Morgan and Billy had provided to Senator Hayes had already reached key officials, along with safeguards ensuring it couldn't be buried again. On screen, Morgan shifted to the most crucial part of his message. "The technology I'm describing was developed using taxpayer funding, then privatized without public knowledge or oversight. Its deployment represents nothing less than an attempt to circumvent the fundamental human right to independent thought." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to register. "I've spent my career using my voice to tell stories that I believed mattered. I never imagined that same voice might be weaponized against the very audience that has trusted it. For that unwitting role, I can only offer my deepest apologies, and this remedy." Morgan then demonstrated several key vocal patterns, explaining how listeners could identify them in future broadcasts. "Listen for these unnatural cadences, these subtle shifts in resonance. Your conscious awareness is the strongest defense against subconscious influence." In the control room, Senator Hayes received confirmation that federal agents were entering Resonance Technologies headquarters with warrants for evidence preservation. Simultaneously, similar operations were underway at affiliated companies and the homes of key executives. As Morgan neared the conclusion of his broadcast, he delivered the final and most powerful counter-pattern sequence, what Dr. Chen had called the cognitive firewall. "We stand at a crossroads between manipulation and freedom, between hidden influence and informed choice. The decision about what to believe and why should always remain yours, conscious, deliberate, and free from invisible coercion." He leaned forward, his expression solemn but hopeful. "I began my journey as a boy in Mississippi, recording stories. With my friend Billy, discovering the magic of how voices affect listeners. That same curiosity led to powerful technology that was nearly used against you today. But knowledge is its own defense. The choice of what to believe should always be yours." As he finished, the broadcast had reached an estimated 2 billion viewers worldwide, the largest simultaneous audience in history, drawn by the unmistakable authentic voice of Morgan Freeman addressing them directly. In the control room, Dr. Chen's instrument showed something remarkable. The counter-patterns were propagating beyond the direct audience, creating what she called resistance ripples as viewers shared and discussed what they'd heard. "It's working," she whispered. Awe in her voice, the counter-voice is spreading. As the red broadcast light dimmed, Morgan exhaled slowly. He looked toward Billy, who was wiping tears from his eyes. "We did it," Billy said, his voice thick with emotion. "After all these years, we really did it." Morgan nodded, feeling the weight of decades lift from his shoulders. His voice, The gift he had nurtured since those Mississippi summers had served its most important purpose, not to entertain or even inform, but to set free. The hours following Morgan's broadcast unfolded like scenes from a thriller. Federal agents seizing servers from Resonance Technologies, news channels scrambling to cover the story, and social media erupting with analysis of voice patterns in previous broadcasts. Schaefer had been taken into custody while attempting to board a private jet to a non-extradition country. 1 week later, Morgan and Billy sat in a Senate hearing room, waiting to testify before a special committee on media manipulation. The room buzzed with tension as journalists adjusted cameras and senators reviewed last-minute briefings. "Nervous?" Billy asked, noting Morgan's fingers tapping silently on the table. "Not about speaking," Morgan replied with a small smile. "That's the easy part. What weighed on him was the aftermath. His narrations were being analyzed worldwide, his career recontextualized, his legacy forever linked to the technology that had nearly weaponized his voice." Senator Hayes entered, nodding respectfully to both men as she took her seat. The committee chair gavelled the session to order, and Morgan was called to testify first. "Mr. Freeman," the chairwoman began, "your broadcast has raised profound questions about media influence and the ethics of sound technology. Would you please explain for the committee how you became aware of Project Echo and its applications?" Morgan leaned toward the microphone, conscious that his voice, the same instrument that had narrated Penguin's journeys and God's conversations with mankind, now carried new weight and scrutiny. "It began with a chance encounter," he said, recounting the story of seeing Billy in Charleston, the investigation that followed, and their discovery of how Project Echo had evolved from childhood experiments to sophisticated manipulation technology. Morgan testified, screens displayed evidence from Billy's years of documentation, internal Resonance Technologies memos, pattern analysis of broadcast segments, and the neurological research underlying it all. "The technology itself isn't inherently harmful," Morgan explained. "Like many scientific advances, its ethics lie in its application. Sound patterns that could help PTSD patients or treat depression were instead deployed to influence public opinion without consent or awareness." When Billy testified, his voice lacked Morgan's resonance but carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had sacrificed everything for truth. "I spent 15 years collecting evidence, being dismissed as paranoid, watching from society's margins as this technology shaped elections, consumer behavior, and public discourse," Billy explained. "The patterns became more sophisticated, more deeply embedded in daily broadcasts. What began as subtle influence was approaching direct manipulation." The hearings continued for days, expanding to include Dr. Chen's technical testimony, whistleblowers from Schaefer's companies, and former Project Echo scientists. The evidence proved irrefutable. 6 months later, Congress passed the Cognitive Liberty Act, establishing strict regulations for subliminal audio techniques and creating an independent oversight body. Morgan returned to Mississippi, retreating from public life while the storm around his revelations settled. Billy came with him, the two old friends finally having the time to reconnect after decades apart. They sat on Morgan's porch one evening, watching fireflies rise from the fields, a sight unchanged since their childhood. "I never thought it would end like this," Billy said, sipping iced tea. "Part of me never thought it would end at all." "Is it over?" Morgan wondered aloud. "The technology exists. Others will try to use it. But without secrecy, without surprise, it loses most of its power." Billy set down his glass. "That's what your broadcast did. Not just exposed one instance, but made the method itself visible." Inside the house, Morgan's phone rang constantly, with interview requests, film offers, and speaking invitations. He'd declined them all, needing time to reconcile his past work with his new understanding. "What will you do now?" Billy asked. "Your voice is still your voice. People still trust it, maybe more than ever." Morgan considered this. For weeks, he'd questioned whether he should ever narrate again, knowing what he now knew about vocal influence. "I think," he said slowly, "I'll use it the way we always imagined as kids, to tell stories that matter, but with transparency about the power of voice itself." The idea crystallized as he spoke. A foundation for ethical storytelling, teaching people about voice patterns, about conscious listening, using the same science that nearly weaponized voice to help people understand its influence. Billy smiled, the same visionary excitement in his eyes that had animated their childhood experiments. The voice trust, he suggested, teaching people to recognize when they're being influenced and when they're making true choices. 6 months later, the Morgan Freeman Voice Trust launched with an innovative program combining neuroscience education and media literacy. Dr. Chen joined as research director, developing simple tools that helped listeners identify embedded patterns in broadcasts. On a crisp autumn morning, Morgan and Billy visited a high school in Greenwood, Mississippi, the first to implement their curriculum. Students gathered in the auditorium, buzzing with excitement about the famous visitors. Today, Morgan told them, you'll learn something most adults don't know: how to truly listen. Not just to words, but to the patterns beneath them that speak directly to your brain. The students watched fascinated as Morgan demonstrated how the same sentence, delivered with different patterns, could create measurably different responses. Your generation will be the first to grow up with this knowledge, Billy added, the first to truly choose what influences you. Afterward, as they walked the school grounds, Morgan noticed a familiar shape in the distance, a small hill with a dark opening. Is that, he began. The echo cave, Billy confirmed, still there after all these years. They stood silently, contemplating the small opening that had started everything. Two curious boys discovering sound's hidden powers, setting in motion events that would reshape media regulations decades later. We should record something new. There, Morgan suggested, for the Foundation archives, where it all began. The next day they returned with recording equipment, ducking through the small entrance into the cool darkness beyond. The cave was smaller than memory suggested, childhood places often are, but its acoustic properties remained remarkable. Hello, Morgan spoke experimentally, hearing his voice ripple back in complex patterns. The echo cave. Billy adjusted the recording levels. What should we say for posterity? Morgan considered for a moment, then began speaking in the measured cadence that had made him famous. We return to this cave as men in our 70s, to the place where two boys once discovered that voices carry power beyond their words. We spoke then of dreams, of reaching audiences with stories that mattered. We could not have imagined how that innocent discovery would one day threaten the very freedom of thought, or that exposing that threat would become our most important story. His voice echoed through the cave, creating natural harmonics that no digital technology could perfectly replicate. The truth about voices is this: they can manipulate or liberate, conceal or reveal. The choice belongs not just to the speaker, but to the listener who understands the difference. Billy recorded silently, tears glistening in his eyes, as Morgan continued. May those who hear this remember that the most powerful voice is the one that speaks the truth, and the most important listening happens when we are fully aware of how voices resonate within us. As the echo of his final words faded, Morgan and Billy sat in the cave's perfect acoustic chamber, two boys from Mississippi who had ventured into the mysteries of sound and emerged decades later with a truth that had changed the world. Some stories, Morgan said softly, take a lifetime to tell. And some voices, Billy replied, are worth waiting a lifetime to hear again. Outside, the Mississippi sun cast long shadows across the landscape of their childhood, while inside the cave, the truth continued to resonate, in perfect, natural patterns that required no manipulation to be heard,